Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Fightful Boxing Podcast. It is October the 3rd, 2019. I'm your host, Carlos Toro, and we're here to discuss Gennadiy Golovkin versus Sergiy Derevyanchenko. You'll get to hear from both fighters. You get from a recent media call that I participated in not too long ago. Also going to talk a little bit about Claressa Shields looking to achieve history and become the first fighter, both male or female, to become a unified world champion in 3 different weight classes in just 10 fights. Faster than any other boxer in history, male or female. We'll also discuss some of the fights that took place recently, including an excellent one between Hiroto Kyoguchi versus Tetusya Hisada for the WBA light flyweight title. I love that fight. I stayed up all night to try to make sure I don't fall asleep and be able to miss the fight, but really enjoyed the fight. We'll discuss that a little bit more during the show. And also the very breaking news regarding Avni Yildirim. We'll get to that in just a second. But before you do, if you're listening on YouTube, subscribe to our Fightful MMA and boxing channel. Head on over to our Fightful Pro Wrestling YouTube channel for plenty of podcasts and reviews regarding WWE Raw, SmackDown, NXT, and All Elite Wrestling. It's going to be a fun time here to be a pro wrestling fan, as you got NXT and AEW finally going head to head. Last night, or at least last night as of this recording, was the first show that had NXT, the first night that had NXT and AEW at the same time. And I gotta say, really loved both shows, and I really enjoyed it, and I can't be more excited to be a wrestling fan nowadays. Head on over to Fightful.com for all the latest news regarding pro wrestling, MMA, and boxing. But without further ado, time for the Fightful Boxing Podcast. We're gonna talk first about the breaking news that hit us this morning regarding Avni Yildirim, the WBC mandatory challenger for the super middleweight title, or at the very least, the presumed mandatory challenger. Well, that no longer seems to be the case. He failed a drug test back in September for the banned substance, and I'm gonna butcher this name, so please bear with me as I say this, metoclopramide. It is an oral anabolic steroid that he tested positive on September 13th on a random drug test in Big Bear, California. The WBC was notified of this on September 26th, and we got the news right now on October the 3rd. So a lot of people are actually kind of excited, really happy to hear the news, because here's the thing with surrounding Avni Yildirim and David Benavidez. I know PBC is really trying its best to sort of maybe push a potential fight between David Benavidez, the WBC champion, and Caleb Plant, the IBF champion, for a unification fight, but we all know that fight was never going to happen next. It's not going to happen anytime soon. It's going to take place summer 2020 at the earliest, if I were to make a guess. And that is being very generous. But now, this does change a lot of things regarding David Benavidez's immediate fight future. Here's why. Yildirim was supposed to be the mandatory challenger. He was going to get a shot at Benavidez's title because of the way the fight between Yildirim and Anthony Dirrell, the previous champion, ended back in February. There was a big brouhaha when it came to the way the fight ended and going to the scorecards on a technical decision. Yildirim barely lost the fight, and he protested. Didn't want the fight result to be overturned, but at least he wanted another shot at the WBC super middleweight title. And so the WBC made a compromise. He was going to get a shot at the WBC title so long as David Benavidez, the champion in recess, who lost his title because of a failed drug test, ironically enough, back in, September 2018. So we got the fight. Benavidez defeated Dirrell, and at least internally within the WBC, the plan in the weeks heading into the fight was that it was going to be the winner of the Dirrell-Benavidez winner versus Yildirim. And now this really changes up a lot of things, because now it almost seems like the floodgates have opened, and now David Benavidez could potentially have a much bigger fight in his hands for his first world title defense in this second reign. Now, the three names that a lot of people are excited to see or want to see fight David Benavidez, they are, and this is by looking at looking by the WBC rankings. First is Chris Eubank Jr. Now, he is the IBO champion. That doesn't really factor into really anything. But the important thing about it is that Eubank is actually the number 2 ranked fighter in the WBC rankings. That's very important, because if the WBC is really intent on pushing through a fight between David Benavidez and a mandatory challenger, the next man up is Chris Eubank Jr. So, and let's not forget, there was a point where Eubank was actually going to be named one of the 2 fighters to fight for the then vacant title last year, or at some point in the last 10 months or so. And then there was a big fallout between Eubank and the WBC at the WBC convention, and so that's why we got Anthony Derevyanchenko versus Avni Yildirim. But since then, Eubank is sort of aligned, he's aligned, or at least involved with PBC in some way, shape, or form. He defeated James DeGale back earlier this year, I think it was in February, over there in the UK. And Eubank, we have not heard anything from him since then. And it's very, very bizarre that we have not heard anything regarding a potential fight anytime soon. So it's possible that fight can happen next. But it really depends on if the WBC wants to make sure that Benavidez makes a mandatory defense of his title. The second name, and that's another fight that the WBC could potentially order, is one between him and Callum Smith, who is the WBC Diamond title holder. And before I explain before we really get into why that fight could potentially happen, the Diamond title is essentially a trinket. It's a belt. It's nothing really that valuable. But what it does is, it does give the WBC I don't know if loophole is the right word, but then it will give them an excuse to order a fight between 2 world champions. Because you have the Diamond belt, you are technically, part of the WBC championship committee, or not committee, but you're in the group of WBC champions, even though the Diamond belt is really, really worthless, let's be honest. And this is not the first time the WBC would even try to pit a world champion that has a Diamond belt versus the WBC world champion, and they failed. As far as I can recall, all those attempts at ordering a unification fight, they've pretty much failed. So I don't know if they're going to try to do this again, but if they order that fight, that's not going to take place for a very, very long time, because Callum Smith is defending his WBA world title against interim title holder John Ryder on November 23rd in Liverpool. So that fight's not going to happen anytime soon. So really, you can kind of cross out that fight from, David Benavidez' immediate fight future. Then, the third name is obviously Caleb Plant. A lot of people wanted to see. I want to see that fight. That would be a hell of a fight, but I don't know if PBC would want to make that fight so soon. So it's possible they're gonna take the rest of the year, maybe marinate that fight a little bit more. And you know how much boxing fans love to hear that word, marinate, but that is the business that we live in. So I would not be surprised if David Benavidez and Caleb Plant, if that fight ever gets made, it's not going to take place this year. So reasonably, among the immediate candidates that could fight David Benavidez, really, it's Chris Eubank Jr. He had a tremendous performance against James DeGale. He doesn't have any fights lined up for him. There's almost not even any news regarding on a potential fight for him next. So, really, we have the WBC convention coming up in the coming weeks, so why not make that fight? I would be more than okay with having this fight as a substitute for, for a Benavidez versus Yildirim fight. And to be honest with you, I actually think David Benavidez versus Chris Eubank Jr. is going to be a better fight than if Benavidez were to fight Yildirim. That's, I think Eubank has really grown in that fight against James DeGale Jr. I still don't think that he is as good as many prophesized he would be, or at the very least his father prophesized he would be years ago. But I do think Chris Eubank Jr. is a solid super middleweight. And he's a guy with, and I've said this in the past, Chris Eubank Jr. has a ton of gifts. From a physical standpoint, the guy is unbelievable. But you look at his skill set, and all you get from him inside the ring, it's raw talent. And he hasn't had a proper trainer to really, hone in and sharpen that tool set. So really all you're getting is just a guy that's kind of more or less getting by just based on his natural gifts alone, and not really, without the use of any real training. It's going to catch up to him sooner or later when he goes up against, world-class fighters like David Benavidez. And I think Benavidez wins that fight, and I think he stops Chris Eubank Jr. But I still would like to see that fight. As for Yildirim, obviously the WBC is investigating this, but kind of seeing how this kind of stuff happens, I would not be surprised if Yildirim gets punished, gets handed down a 6-month suspension from the WBC, retroactive to the date of the initial drug test fail. So if it is September 13th, Friday, September 13th, that would mean a 6-month suspension would mean he'd be out of the ring for until March 13, 2020. So now you're looking at least 13 months out of the ring. And let's be honest, Avni Yildirim, he looked pretty good against Anthony Dirrell. He fought well, but let's be honest, that he's not going to fight. He's not going to beat the likes of David Benavidez. He's not going to beat Caleb Plant. Not going to beat Callum Smith. I don't think Avni Yildirim beats any of the world champions at this stage of his career. I mean, he's 28, and he'll be, he just turned 28, so he's kind of more or less in his physical prime, but he's lost to Chris Eubank Jr. He's lost to Anthony Dirrell. I don't see Avni Yildirim getting that much better to the point where I think he'll win a major world title by facing any of the top 3, top 5 guys. And he's now gonna have to use 2020 as his year to just shake off the ring rust. So really, Avni Yildirim challenging for a world title, that's not going to take place until maybe 2021, if we're being completely honest with you. So, listen, I'm not saying that, I don't know the full facts on this, but if Yildirim did, in fact, knowingly and willingly took an oral anabolic steroid, how stupid can one guy be to have it take an anabolic steroid like that? I mean, you have essentially a world title fight, served to you on a silver platter, and you just throw it all away. That was real stupid, real boneheaded decision for Avni Yildirim. I don't know the full facts on the thing, but if it does turn out that he did knowingly and willingly take banned substances, there's no sympathy for the guy. He had an opportunity. All he had to do was wait. He didn't even need to fight to get another shot at the world title. All he had to do was wait. So, I don't know about you, but Avni Yildirim, boy, this could not be any worse for his career, really. So now moving on to this weekend's slate of fights. And we got Gennadiy Golovkin against Sergiy Derevyanchenko in the co-main event of the Zone card from Madison Square Garden. It's for the IBF middleweight title, the vacant IBF middleweight title, and there's a lot of really interesting subplots heading into this fight. And I'm just not just talking about the world title main event that we got in store, but there's a lot of really interesting fights between on the undercard. And the undercard, I believe, it's a very solid and very underrated card. You got Ivan Baranchyk against Gabriel Bracero. You got Israel Madrimov, the Russian, Uzbekistan super prospect / contender. He's already in 4 pro fights. He's already a world title contender against Alejandro Barrera for the WBA Intercontinental Junior Middleweight title. You got Ali Akhmedov against Andrew Hernandez. The undefeated Brian Ceballo against Ramal Amanov. You got Camille Sharameta. You got Nikita Ababi. I really don't know how to pronounce the name. But the point being, you have a lot of really good fights on this undercard. And I really do recommend checking out the undercard. I really think that this is going to be a really awesome card. But for the main event, Golovkin, his career for the last 24 months has been very, very interesting, very bizarre. You have the first fight against Canelo Alvarez, which was what it was. It was a draw. Many thought Golovkin won. I believe I had Golovkin winning by 1 point, or at the very least had it a draw. I think I had it a draw. Then you had the failed attempt at getting the rematch for Cinco de Mayo 2018 because Canelo Alvarez couldn't get away from that tasty, contaminated Mexican meat. And then you had the actual rematch take place last September, and another close fight. Canelo won that one. Golovkin lost that one. And now you got Golovkin trying to get that third fight against Canelo Alvarez. Didn't get it. Got the fight against Steve Rolls, who, no disrespect to Steve Rolls, but I don't think many of us were really considering Steve Rolls to be a legitimate world champion, a world title contender or world champion contender. I like Steve Rolls. I guess they never thought there was a chance he was going to beat Gennadiy Golovkin. But now you are entering the stage of Golovkin's career where he's 37. He's going up against a younger, hungry middleweight guy in Sergiy Derevyanchenko, who's not that much younger. He's only 4 years younger. However, Derevyanchenko is a guy who fought Danny Jacobs last year, was really, really close in beating Danny Jacobs. That fight ended up being a split decision. And now you're in a position where Derevyanchenko has Andre Rozier in his corner, and Andre Rozier has prepared for Golovkin in the past, so he knows how to prepare for Golovkin. He hasn't been successful in beating Golovkin, but at least he is probably the best guy you can probably ask for in terms of scouting Golovkin and seeing what he can do and preparing for that fight. And the fight between Golovkin and Derevyanchenko, it's very interesting. Derevyanchenko is the underdog, but I think this fight is very, very close to being a 50-50 fight. I think Golovkin is no spring chicken. He looked good against Steve Rolls. There was a bit of a moment in the fight where Golovkin, I wouldn't say he got hurt, but he got tagged real good by Steve Rolls, and that put a lot of people... that put a lot of people on the edge of their seats, and some people thought maybe this is it for maybe Golovkin is not the fighter that he once was. And let's be honest, Father Time is undefeated, but you look at Golovkin, you look at Jonathan Banks, there is still a level of uncertainty of what this version of Golovkin will look like against a top 10 middleweight. No disrespect to Steve Rolls, but he is in that top 10 middleweight. But Derevyanchenko is. He's very, very strong. He's a guy that will make the fight very uncomfortable for you. And Derevyanchenko in that fight against Danny Jacobs, you could tell, especially early on in the fight, Derevyanchenko didn't really know what to expect against a guy like Danny Jacobs in a world title setting. Obviously, Derevyanchenko and Jacobs have fought each other, have sparred against one another for a very, very long time. Have had hundreds and hundreds of rounds of sparring, but that's not the same as being in an actual fight. But even to a certain extent, you could tell that both guys were kind of going for the emotion, trying to figure each other out, how to best attack each other in a pro fight setting, not in the gym, not in a sparring session. And I got to ask Golovkin about that fight, what he thought about Sergiy Derevyanchenko. And here is what Golovkin had to say about Sergiy Derevyanchenko and what to expect for in that fight against him on Saturday. Gennadiy, did you get a chance to see Sergey's fight against Danny Jacobs last year? And if so, what do you think of Sergey being able to go toe-to-toe with a guy like Danny Jacobs at that point in his career?
Видел ли ты бой Сергея с Дэнни Джейкобсом в прошлом году? И можешь ли ты прокомментировать на то, как удачно он провел бой, не отступая от Дэнни Джейкобса на протяжении всего боя?
Да, я видел этот бой. Это там действительно был такой бой, как работа спарринговый бой, так как они давно друг друга знают и давно с друг другом работают постоянно, в принципе. И этот бой показал, что они действительно как бы что один, что второй, они знали свою работу, просто один справился, второй не справился. Я имею в виду, что там как бы большую роль в этом сыграл угол, то есть если у них один тренер, если бы тренер был, смотря на какой стороне он был, на тот момент он был на стороне Джейкобса, Джейкобс победил. Если он был бы на стороне Деревянченко, то, скорее всего, и Деревянченко победил бы. Ну, то есть там такой бой был, как спарринг.
Yes, I saw the fight. It was a very technical fight. It felt like a sparring session in a way. It felt like both of them knew each other really well. They knew what workload they had cut out in front of them. And really, the decision was made by the corner of the fighter. Depends on which corner the trainer would have been in. That fighter would have won. If the Jacobs had the right coach in his corner, he would have won. And if Sergey had the right coach, he won.
And that was Golovkin, and I think Golovkin is the rightful favorite, and I do expect Golovkin to win that fight. However, I don't think it's gonna be as wide as some people make it out to be. Derevyanchenko, as I mentioned, he has this incredible amateur pedigree. Almost got, skyrocketed into the main world title picture with just a few fights into his pro career. He was already a mandatory challenger with, 10, 11 pro fights under his belt. And now Derevyanchenko is a guy that already has tasted fighting at the world championship level against a legitimate top 5 middleweight in Danny Jacobs last year. I think he's a better fighter this year than he was this time around last year because of that experience of facing a guy like Danny Jacobs. Here is what Derevyanchenko had to say when I asked him about getting that experience from fighting a guy like Danny Jacobs and what he's taken from that fight and how he's going to apply it into this fight. I'm sure you would have loved to have won that decision against Danny Jacobs last year in your first title challenge, but having the experience of facing a guy like Danny Jacobs and going toe-to-toe for the most part against him, do you feel like now you're a better fighter because you had that experience of facing a guy like Danny Jacobs, who some argue beat Golovkin a couple of years ago?
Вопрос такой, Сергей. Да, вы взяли бой с Джейкобсом. Но вы думаете, что вы имели этот бой, это как бы из этого боя вы стали и лучшие боксеры, и сейчас вы, может быть, еще лучше готовы за бой, как с Головкиным, потому что много людей думают, что Джейкобс сам победил Головкин пару лет назад.
Ну, я чувствую сильней, чувствую опытней, потому что бой с Головкиным дала мне много опыта и в бою с такими боксерами, опыт и в тренировочном лагере, как надо готовиться к таким прям большим боям. И тоже мне очень большой опыт дал бой с Кулькаум.
И вот эти два последних боя, как бы они мне очень-очень помогли. И стать сильнее, лучше. У меня все.
Yes, it did give me the experience, and I think it's the experience that's necessary, but not just the Jacobs fight, the fight with Koke as well, give me the experience, and it also proved to me and to everyone else that I do belong on this level. I do belong with the best middleweights in the world, and as a result of that, I'm strong, I'm ready, and I have the experience.
So, quick rundown of the undercard, real quick. Just another quick rundown. Obviously, you got guys like Ivan Baranchyk, Israel Madrimov, Ali Akhmedov. It's a very, very solid undercard. I do recommend watching this fight. So, as for my predictions, at least for the top 5 fights, or at least what I think will be the top 5 fights in this card, kind of going from, bottom to the top, Brian Ceballos against Ramal Amanov. I like Brian Ceballos. I think he's one of the more underrated welterweights prospects out there. I think he's going to win. He's a very strong fighter. I think he's a guy that is capable of knocking guys out in pretty spectacular fashion. He's now starting to dip his toes to 8 rounds. He's going to go up against a guy in Ramal Amanov. Not really that much of a big name. He hasn't really faced a whole lot of good competition as of late. He's on a 3-fight knockout streak, but you look at the guys he's faced, it's, the combined records are, for those 3 opponents, are 0 wins, 2 losses, 1 draw, and one of those fighters was on his debut. So, there's not much to take away from Amanov. He's 35 years old. His knockout numbers aren't really all that impressive. He at one point he got a DQ win over Rances Baiano back in 2015, and then after that he was out of the sport for nearly 2 years, and since then he hasn't faced anyone of note. So I don't think Amanov knows what to expect with Ceballos, and I think Ceballos wins this one. I think he stops Ramel Amanov. Ali Akhmedov versus Andrew Hernandez for the WBC International Silver Super Middleweight title. That's a mouthful. Akhmedov, he's a guy that I really, really like. He's a guy that I think has solid potential to potentially challenge for a world title much, much later down the line. He's only 24, so there's no rush to really put him in a position to fight for a world title. But getting these types of fights against veterans such as Andrew Hernandez, I think that's going to work out very well for him. And I think Ali Akhmedov is going to win this fight. I think this will go to the scorecards. He's, Andrew Hernandez is a guy, he's been stopped before. He's been knocked out. But you look at the names that he's faced, I mean, they're no jokes. He fought Jesse Hart. He's fought Caleb Plant. He's fought Patrick Teixeira. He went the distance against Caleb Plant and Patrick Teixeira. So that kind of tells you that the guy is capable of taking a punch, despite essentially being outclassed in every single round. Interesting enough, this is a very fun stat. Out of the 18 rounds that Andrew Hernandez has fought between Caleb Plant and Patrick Teixeira, on all 3 judges' scorecards in each individual fights, in total, Andrew Hernandez has only won 1 round. He has lost every single round on every single scorecard from every single judge except for 1 round. So, I mean, more than anything, he'll take a punch and Akhmedov will test him, but I think Akhmedov wins this one by decision. Israel Madrimov against Alejandro Barrera. I like Israel Madrimov. He's 3-0, but he's already at a position where he could be fighting for a world title, theoretically. I'm not sure if I think he's ready. I don't think he's ready. I think he's in a position where, you could theoretically put him in a world title fight right now, but I think he's in a position where he's not really ready and he still needs a little bit more seasoning. Guys, his last fight against Norberto Gonzalez, he dominated that fight, but I don't know. It felt to me that he still needed more experience fighting at the pro level. So, I don't know. I think Israel Madrimov wins this one, but I don't think that this will be the fight that catapults him into a world title fight next. But I like Israel Madrimov. I really do. Ivan Baranchyk against Gabriel Bracero for the vacant WBA Intercontinental Junior Welterweight title. I like this fight. It's Ivan Baranchyk for his first fight after that really, really nasty looking beating he took from Josh Taylor back in May. And I'm surprised he actually came back in less than 5 months. So kudos to Baranchyk for recovering, and I think Ivan Baranchyk is one of the better junior welterweights today. I think he's one of the best. I think he's still a top 10 140-pound boxer right now. But you go up against Gabriel Bracero. He's 38. Hasn't really picked up a really meaningful win in a very, very long time. His last big win was Danny O'Connor. You want to say if that's a big win, Danny O'Connor, but barely. And before that, the big win was Dmitry Salita in Salita's final fight. I mean, he's faced a lot of veterans, a lot of older guys, and its results have been mixed. So he has not faced a guy like Ivan Baranchyk in a very long time, if ever. I think Baranchyk wins this one. I think he stops, Gabriel Bracero. I think, I don't think it's much of a contest right then and there. As for the main event, Golovkin against Sergiy Derevyanchenko. I like this fight, as I mentioned earlier. Golovkin he's still, in my opinion, the second best middleweight in the world. But even I have to admit, there's a little bit of uncertainty when it comes to this Jonathan Banks-Golovkin unit. Not that I think that the partnership is not going to work. I just don't know what I'm getting yet. Because the fight against Steve Rolls, it hasn't really told me anything. We knew Golovkin was going to dominate Steve Rolls. We knew he was going to knock him out. That fight didn't really tell us anything. But with Derevyanchenko, when we saw him face Danny Jacobs, he was a guy who didn't know what to expect from Danny Jacobs in that kind of environment, fighting on HBO, fighting on Madison Square Garden for a world title. But now that he's gotten that experience, I think he's a much better fighter. I think this will be a very close fight. I could see Golovkin winning this very, very closely, and I do mean like 116-112 on the scorecards. Golovkin probably might drop Sergiy Derevyanchenko because Derevyanchenko was dropped by Dan Jacobs in the first round. So we could see a knockdown or two. I think Golovkin wins this one on the scorecards very, very closely. I think it's going to be a very good fight. I think it's going to be a very fun night of boxing over there at the Garden. But that's not the only world title fight that's going to be taking place on October 5th. We have a women's world title fight over there in Flint, Michigan on Showtime. Claressa Shields against Ivana Habazin for the unified vacant WBO and WBC junior middleweight championships. It's, as I mentioned at the start of the show, Claressa Shields has the opportunity to become the first fighter, male or female, to win unified title, to win more than at least 2 world titles in 3 different weight classes in just 10 pro bouts, male or female. No one's ever done it before in history. And this is pretty significant. I mean, we are now living in an era where women's boxing is now starting to get a much bigger share of the spotlight, thanks to women like Heather Hardy, Amanda Serrano, Katie Taylor, Michaela Mayer, and obviously Claressa Shields arguably leading the way, not to mention also Cecilia Brækhus. But, when you look at this fight, Ivana Habazin, I don't know, I didn't like her performance against Cecilia Brækhus some time ago. I just don't think Ivana Habazin is the fighter to beat Claressa Shields. I mean, let's be honest. We look at Claressa Shields' career, Franchon Cruz Dezern, Nikki Adler, Tori Nelson, Hannah Gabriels, Hannah Rankin, Christina Hammer. Aside from getting dropped once against Hannah Gabriels, really, Claressa Shields has not really faced any adversity whatsoever. She's dominated every single fight, in her career. So I don't think that this is the fight for Claressa Shields to lose. Besides, she has, I don't know if a chip on her shoulder is the correct answer, but she's very motivated to fight in front of her hometown fans in Flint, Michigan. And I asked her about that and about the timing of her 10th pro bout and I believe her 7th world title fight, or 6th, 7th world title fight, finally being the homecoming fight that she's won for some time. I asked her in a recent media call, and this is what Claressa Shields had to tell me about fighting in Flint, Michigan.
So my first question is, I'm looking, this fight is obviously your first pro bout in Flint, Michigan, and I'm surprised, admittedly, I'm a little surprised you haven't had one sooner into your career. I just wanted to ask, what does fighting in front of your hometown fans mean to you, especially with all that you've accomplished? And did you think that you would get this homecoming fight sooner in your career or later in your career?
I don't know. I feel like that the fight came at the right time. I wanted to be super accomplished when I went back home to Flint, and that's just because I wanted the kids to see that, I like that I'm from Flint, Michigan, and I've accomplished all this, and I'm not waiting to the end of my career to come back to Flint. I'm coming back to Flint in the peak of my career. I'm coming back while I'm a world champion, while I'm an undisputed champion, while I'm breaking records. I'm bringing a fight back to Flint. And I feel like me becoming a 3-time division world champion, the fastest boxer to do so in 10 fights, beating Lomachenko's record, I feel like that was a perfect fight to bring back to Flint. While we have, all this water crisis stuff going on, I just feel like, right now was the right time to just inspire the city and inspire the kids.
Is this fight, being your first at 154 pounds, or is it your first world title fight at that weight class, is this sort of the start of a journey to maybe try to do the same as you did at 160 and unify the entire division, or is this sort of a one-time deal at 154 and then move back up to middleweight?
I don't really know yet. I feel like it really depends on how I feel during the fight. I feel great right now. I've been feeling great in camp. I've been eating healthy and dropping the weight that I'm supposed to. I've been hydrated. So it's just all about, going into the fight, actually touching 154, getting on the scale and getting in the ring. So I won't know till what I'm going to do till after the fight.
And that was Claressa Shields. I really like Claressa Shields. I know a lot of people don't really like her. She's maybe like an acquired taste or anything. I do like Claressa Shields. She's very outspoken, but listen, she may have her opinions in boxing, and I may disagree with them from time to time, but that's her opinion. She has the right to share her opinion in boxing. And skills-wise, you really cannot deny that she is arguably the best female fighter on the planet right now, pound for pound. Some may argue Amanda Serrano, some may argue Katie Taylor. If you ask me right now, October 3rd, 2019, I think Claressa Shields is the best fighter pound for pound, followed by Amanda Serrano and then Katie Taylor. It's pretty much been a 3-woman race between those three for best pound for pound fighter in the world today. But I think right now Claressa Shields is the number one fighter, and I don't think she's gonna struggle all too much against Ivana Habazin. But Ivana has really done well to get back in a position to fight for a world title after the loss to Cecilia Brækhus a few years ago, after losing to Michaela Lauren. She's done well. She's managed to get 5 straight wins. It hasn't been against really solid competition, but she's dominated every single one of those fights. So I do think that Ivana Habazin, is more comfortable fighting at 154 than when she fought at 147. I don't know if 154 is more her natural weight, but she is someone that could potentially present some problems to Claressa Shields, maybe early on in the fight. I talked to Ivana Habazin about that fight and about what she thought about the fight, which was originally supposed to take place in August, being postponed because Claressa Shields suffered an injury during training. Here's what Ivana Habazin told me about this fight.
Claressa has mentioned sort of saying that she thinks it's foolish that, you talk about knocking her out, especially for home fans. Do you have, what are your thoughts on kind of Claressa sort of shutting down any possibilities of you knocking her out? And where does the confidence come from in saying that you're going to knock her out when Claressa has never even been beaten before?
I think I can punch, and the difference before was like, on some part, I wasn't like finish people, but that was my problem. Right now, it's different story, and like I said, I made the best preparation ever. Never ever before in my life I didn't do preparation like this, and I feel strong. I really feel strong. So. And I think I have power to knock people out. So for this fight, this is my goal, because I will not. I don't believe, like in just scorecards. So when you knock somebody out, especially in that big fight, that's the only way how you can win. And I was really prepared for that all the time.
Last question, when obviously this fight was originally supposed to take place a couple of months ago, and so what was your first reaction when you heard that the fight was going to be delayed for a couple of months, or at least it wasn't going to take place in August as it was originally planned?
My first reaction was, damn, I will not see my dogs 2 more months. So, that's boxing. Everything is possible. Maybe in some way I maybe expect something like that, but you never know. Everything is possible. Everybody can injure and all this stuff. But that's it. We got the other date, so I prepare myself to stay in the camp, training more, and maybe with this, actually, she helped me, because I feel I'm much better right now.
Thank you, Ivana, and best of luck on October the 5th.
Thank you so much.
Now, real quick, I'm going to give my predictions for this fight. I think Claressa Shields wins this fairly easily. I think it's going to be on the scorecards. I'm, at most, maybe Ivana gets a round or 2, no more than 2. I think Claressa Shields dominates this one. She becomes the new 154-pound world champion. We'll see what her future is going to be after this fight. I'm really interested because she is still the undisputed middleweight champion. So it really all depends. I think I would love for her to sort of try to unify the 154-pound division. And if she can make weight and have no problems making 154, I say go for her. I think she should seek out the challenges of unifying 154 and becoming boxing's first ever female 2-time undisputed champion. The undercard is pretty good, actually. You got Jermaine Franklin against Pavel Sauer. Jermaine Franklin is a heavyweight prospect that I really, really like. He didn't look all too great against Jerry Forrest in this last fight. He dominated Rydell Booker back in April, so there is a lot of intrigue surrounding which Jermaine Franklin we're going to see. He's only 25, so there's still a lot there's still a lot to learn about Jermaine Franklin. He's still a prospect. He's not going to be touching the world title anytime soon. So if he looks good against Pavel Sauer, and then maybe you should start thinking about giving him stronger opponents as we start to see what kind of fighter he is in terms of maybe potentially giving him top 20, top 15 opponents and seeing if he's really a world title contender. And then you got also in the co-main event, Jaron Ennis versus Daniel Fernandez. Ennis, I'm going to go out and say it, I think Ennis is one of the best prospects in boxing right now. Guy is a beast of a welterweight. He's only 22 years old, but he's a guy who is so damn impressive, is so strong. I think Boots has what it takes to be a world champion, or at least fight for a world title within a year or two. He's only 22 years old, so there's still a lot of growing for Jaron Ennis, but my God, how could you not love the potential that Jaron Ennis brings to the table? He's a guy who's sparred with lots of top names throughout his year, and he's looked damn good every time they put on Showtime, on ShowBox. I think he's got what it takes to be a world champion. I think he's gonna stop Daniel Fernandez within the first 3 or 4 rounds. I mean, he's done that for the last 4 or 5 fights. Yeah, that's another thing about Jaron Ennis, is he's a guy who is very aggressive, very strong, and he'll attack his opponents from the get-go. So I think Jaron Ennis wins this fight fairly easily. I'd say 3rd, 4th round TKO. And lastly, before we wrap up this episode of the Fightful Boxing Podcast, got a real good fight from this past Tuesday that I think you should all check out. It was a fight in Japan for the WBA light flyweight title between Hiroto Kyoguchi against Tetusya Hisada. I gotta say, this was, for a while, it was threatening to be the best fight of the year. It was on its way to becoming better, or at least on par with Sean Porter versus Errol Spence Jr. The action between both Kyoguchi and Hisada was amazing. It was very entertaining. It was well worth staying up all night just to be able to see those two fight. It was actually a closer fight than I originally thought on paper. I thought Kyoguchi was gonna stop Tetsuya Hisada, but Hisada proved to be a very worthwhile opponent. He's a guy who was essentially on his last legs in terms of fighting for a world title, and this was essentially his last shot, and he made the most out of it. I thought this was one of Hisada's best performances in recent years, and Kyoguchi gave us a top 10 fight of the year. I highly recommend you guys check it out. I believe it's still on YouTube. The company, the broadcast company, MBS, they broadcast that fight live globally for free. Thanks to a partnership between them and Asian Boxing. Gotta say, AsianBoxing.info. If you guys want great coverage on boxing from the world of Asia, Japan, the Philippines, China, those guys are unbelievable. I really do recommend checking out this fight if you can find it. It's very fun. Kyoguchi retained the WBA light flyweight title by unanimous decision. This was, again, one of the best fights of the year. I love this fight. I really am excited for a potential showdown between Kyoguchi and the WBC champion Kenshiro. I don't know if that fight's gonna I don't know if that fight's possible for the December 31st show in Japan, because Japan loves doing these December 31st super shows. I don't know if they're gonna do it for them, but although that would be perfect for that kind of environment, for that kind of atmosphere. But 2020 sounds more reasonable. I do gotta say, between the great fighters at 108 pounds, I think arguably the two best fighters in that weight class are Kyoguchi and Kenshiro. They're that good, and I gotta say, I really hope that fight happens. And again, really recommend you guys go out of your way to watch this fight. Lots of action, very good back and forth exchanges throughout the entire fight, really. Personally, I had that fight scored 115 to 112 in favor of Kyoguchi, and he won that fight right around those margins. So really excited to see it. So really excited. And that about wraps it up for this edition of the Fightful Boxing Podcast. As I mentioned, head on over to FightfulBoxing.com. Subscribe to our Fightful MMA and Boxing YouTube channel, and head on over to Fightful.com for all the latest news in pro wrestling, MMA, and boxing. Carlos Toro of the Fightful Boxing Podcast. We're out.